Parents of Reddit, what is most fucked up secret you are hiding from your children? In the child, but my dad waited till I'm grown up to tell me that my mom gave me a lot of sleeping pills when I was a little child, so she could leave me alone at home to maintain her relationship with her lover while my dad was working in another country. That cleared up many things. Edit. Thanks for everyone wishing me well. I really appreciate that him doing well, and it doesn't affected me. Beside that, I don't remember much about my childhood, but I didn't suffer or whatever. Meanwhile, I'm dealing with depression and anxiety since a few years, but I'm not sure if this links to the drugging. But meanwhile, I'm pretty good at being depressed, to be honest, haha. Otherwise, is my life really good? I want to clear up that I'm in okay terms with my mom. She learned from her mistakes and I forgave her. I just don't forgive her that she did my dad so dirty. My dad is the greatest person I've ever known and he deserves to be happy. People are brutal. Well, sorry, man. My parents told me my sister is adopted. They didn't tell her. She's 34. BTW, help, what do I do? Buy the whole family DNA test kits for Christmas and watch the world burn. Savage. But actually intrigued on how that will go. Go on our 23andMe and find out. Happens every day. Also heard info that we're divorced. Hashtag X200B. Years before they came along, spouse and I decided it wasn't working out and got divorced. Years later, things still weren't working out fantastically for both of us, so we got back together. Never did get around to getting remarried though. That I don't actually enjoy watching Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. My 2-year-old would be devastated because that's our show. I'm not the parent in the child, but my family kept it a secret that my brother was a child molester and that my grandpa had raped my mother and threatened to kill us grandkids. I found out because I told my sister that my brother had molested me and she told me about the rest. We were raised having a relationship with them like they were normal human beings. It's absolutely disgusting. My uncle molested all 3 of his sisters and everyone acts like it's no big deal. It's just not talked about at all. I don't speak to him because my father told me when I was very young to never be in a room alone with him, but also because he's an insufferable C who thinks he's better than everyone. How can you molest your 3 sisters and not at least have the decency to acknowledge you're at least slightly worse than most people? He doesn't have to be so smug about it. Because he got away with it. That I got all these bedtime facts from Reddit. That was an awesome thread, BTW. My daughter knows that her grandparents are getting a divorce. She doesn't know that it's because Grandpa, 72, decided to knock up a 23-year-old. We will talk about it once she's older, but I don't want to normalize that relationship for a pre-adolescent. Edit. This is my father-in-law. He's definitely not rich, in fairly impressive shape for a dude pulling Social Security, and I am happily ignorant as to the status of his erections. It's a small-town story with a ducked-up single mom and an old man that hasn't experienced much emotional growth since being drafted for service in Vietnam. These people would never end up together if they were emotionally healthy and didn't have control issues. I am definitely going to do my best to explain to my daughter, but she's 9 and emotionally overwhelmed by the very idea of the divorce. When she comes to me to talk about it, having processed the idea, then I will explain the situation more fully. My husband has already told his dad that our family and his new family won't be getting together for a barbecue anytime in the foreseeable future. Edit 2. A lot of you dudes are assuming a lot about 23. I would remind you that we are talking about small town, single mama, daddy issues, rural deep south, grandpa fucking 23. Y'all are a bunch of optimists. So the aunt will be younger than the niece. Quiet down, Jon Snow. That she can't have a relationship with her grandfather because he's a pedophile and I would never trust him. The rest of my family maintains a relationship with him and leans on me hard to open up communication because family comes first. They are absolutely right. My family does come first, which is why my daughter won't ever have to have a relationship with him. Edit. He has raped multiple members of my family and I only found out when I was pregnant with my daughter. Without going into too much detail, he also has a mental illness and I've been told that I need to let him have a relationship with my daughter because he's sick and couldn't help it. You are doing the right thing. I only found out a couple of years ago that my grandfather was a pedophile and molested most of my aunts and maybe uncles. That also explained why about 90% of my uncles and aunts have been raging alcoholics for their entire lives. He wasn't really my grandfather. He took care of my grandmother when her husband left her and their 6 children. To me, he was my grandfather and he was my godfather. I just don't understand why my otherwise perfectly fine parents had us stay over at my grandmother's place when he was always around. Nothing ever happened as far as I can remember, but I just don't understand why you would take that risk as a parent, no matter how small that risk might be. I have a daughter of my own now, and if that ducker would still be alive today, I would not let him anywhere near her. Oh yeah, he was a priest when he took my grandmother in but had to leave the church a few years later. I wonder why. That we don't go to bed the same time as they do. That's me every night at bedtime. Daughter, books. Me, no more books, time for night-night. Daughter, books. Me, no more books, time for night-night. Daughter, Mama. Me, Mama went night-night, time for night-night. Daughter, Daddy. Me, yes, I'm going night-night too. It's 6:45, of course I'm not going night-night. Sounds like she has her priorities in order. Totally. I was really lucky that both my parents are into books and both read to me. It got me reading well ahead of the curve, and whilst I've not actually done anything really productive with my life, I've retained my love of literature and study. I think an interest in books is one of the best things you can give a kid. A second language being another one. My son's older half-sister molested him and that's why we don't see them anymore. Waiting until we can get into a site for support before we break it to him. Edit. He was 3 when it happened, so was able to tell us, quite graphically, what was happening. The sister also admitted it and said she did it because it was funny and she liked to hurt him. DCP, Child Protective Services, became involved and investigated both families but couldn't find anything suspicious. We are telling him because we very strongly believe it is the right thing to do. We don't know how much he remembers and would much prefer to give him the coping skills now instead of possibly letting him disintegrate into a non-functioning adult with massive problems. Thank you so much for all the support. It is a horrible thing to deal with, but we are going to do everything in our power to love and support him. I am so sorry that so many of you had to go through similar situations. I am proud of every one of you for surviving and fighting. I'm really glad that you stopped all contact and looked to get him professional help. I know people in similar positions, but the families still keep them around or stay in contact. Thanks. He did get professional help when it happened, but he was only 3. We think he remembers it but wants us to say it. His school thinks it has a lot to do with current behavior and learning difficulties, so it's time to face it and hopefully put it behind us for good. As a child, I experienced something similar, though I did not have parents nearly as supportive. Well done. Don't forget to look into help for yourself as well, as I imagine the situation must also come with a bit of guilt. I want to say this gently, but just remember that there is no putting it behind you for good. He can learn to deal with and accept what happened, but it will still always be a part of his life story. There will always be some dark days, but as long as he has such supportive, caring and understanding family around him, I'm sure he'll be able to pull through and still live a happy and accomplished life. Oh, so much guilt. 7 years later and still so much guilt. I know there is no for good, but I'm desperately hoping we can reach a point where it doesn't affect every single thing we do. Every time we have a meeting about his schoolwork, behavior, immaturity, etc., it gets brought up. I'm hoping if we can help him now, then it won't continuously affect him. I know he is always going to have it there, especially when he becomes older and starts thinking about girls, but I'm hoping it will become something that he can learn to be okay with. Good on you for trying so hard. It's more than most do. It's a hard and scary task that a lot of parents chose to ignore instead. This says a lot about your strength of character, which will surely be a great example for your son to follow. I don't have kids, but here is a family secret. My mom and I left the straightener on for 2 days while we took a family trip to Canada. It doesn't have an automatic off. We haven't told my dad. Edit. The house is fine. The counter was just really hot. This was like 2 years ago. Holy cow, my daughter and I have done this. Bonus story detail: my husband is a firefighter and was at work the day we forgot. I was mortified at how close he was to having to fight a fire in his own house. So mortified, in fact, of having him discover in full gear my forgotten flat iron that I went back to curly hair. And all I could do was look at my daughter and say, this never leaves this room. Do you have any idea the shit he'd get from his friends for decades? He'd have to retire. Source: 3 bugles on my hat.